What if I told you that data isn't truth, but a mirror of what we choose to measure? In today's conversation with data scientist, stand up comedian, and fire dancing acrobat, Andrea Jones-Rooy, we unpack why the future of global citizenship depends on creative thinking, scientific humility, and a whole lot more curiosity. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan. I'm Dan Peters, psychologist and leadership coach. This show is all about bringing hope, connection, awareness, and wisdom through meaningful conversations that inspire us to become better versions of ourselves and have a positive impact on humanity. This is your space to pause, reflect, and reconnect with who you are, what you care about, and who you want to be. We have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. Today's show is Using Data to Make the World Better with Andrea Jones-Rooy. Andrea is a data scientist who is obsessed with sharing the power of thinking like a data scientist with the world. Originally trained as a political scientist, Andrea is particularly interested in how we can use data to better understand some of our thorniest and seemingly most intractable political and social problems, and then use that newfound clarity to actually make the world better. Andrea holds a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan, formerly a professor of data science at NYU and a quantitative researcher at 538. Andrea speaks and trains globally from Fortune 500s to tech companies to the UN on how to apply data science to their toughest problems. Andrea currently hosts the podcast Behind the Data and was the previous host of Majoring in Everything. And being the multifaceted human being that she is, she's also a stand-up comedian, circus performer, and acrobat. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. That was a very thorough introduction, and I felt like I was like every time you'd say, I was like, yeah, that's true. Also, yep, also true. Well, but it's too much, I think. Sometimes.
I knew I was speaking who I was speaking to, so I got to get it factually correct because we're going to be talking about data. And I just wanted to get in there like your mission, which I love, and then who you are, which we're going to dive into. So let's just start there.
Okay.
So let's start with how you went to a political science program and were unknowingly changed and transformed into a data scientist.
Right. Yeah, it was. So the field of data science hasn't. That's not me correcting you. Both pronunciations.
I was thinking about that too when I said it. Is it data or data? Like, what is?
I say data. It probably is data. It's also plural, and I use it singularly. So I'm probably getting it all wrong. So we probably should say data are, but I say data is because I'm.
Oh, okay. I'm going to try to go with data because he was one of my favorite characters on Star Trek Next Generation. Yeah. So data. Okay, go for it. Okay.
But any all of the above is fine. And so the field, whatever you want to call it, didn't exist when I went to grad school. And so I went to grad school 15-ish years ago for a PhD in political science. And I thought at the time that political science meant writing long essays about like the nature of war and whether humans are inherently evil and whether there must be conflict, like just like long meandering essays for foreign affairs or whatever. And I got there and it turned out that there was a ton of statistics and math and game theory. And I really hated it for a long time and was like, this isn't right for me. I don't know why I'm here. I always hated math growing up. And then after a few years of literally having it forced to me, I had this day, and I'm happy to belabor the point, but I was reading this particular paper by a scholar named Robert Axelrod that was all about using numbers and a computer program to simulate how cultures exchange information between one another. And through that paper, was able to predict and explain how we get into situations where we're polarized, whether it's politically polarized or polarized in terms of fashion tastes or religion or whatever, and what causes us to get into groups where some people, we have nothing in common with the group next to us, so we have no overlap. And I just thought it was the most amazing use of just like zeros and ones and numbers to understand this really complicated thing. And this was even before polarization was like the hot topic of the day, right?
Yeah.
And so from that moment onward, it wasn't quite that linear, but like pretty much from that moment, I was like, oh, there's something to these numbers. And so started really leaning into it, and eventually ended up, I have a lot of interest, mostly in politics academically, but a lot enough, other social sciences and so on, that the field of data science became more of a thing in the couple of years after I left graduate school. And data science really was using those same statistical methods that I learned in political science to understand politics, but also to understand, workplace dynamics and racial equity. And not that that's not also politics in a lot of ways, but, psychology. And so it's just been a lot of fun to get to still focus on politics, but also use data science skills to talk to people in totally different fields, which is it's good for the brain, I think, to get out of your own field. So
well, and were you always a numbers person? Because you went in thinking of being a words person, right? It was all about words.
Not at all. I hated numbers. I was like the opposite of a math person growing up. I didn't get it. I didn't like it. I remember, I don't know if you're a numbers person, but learning FOIL in middle school, the math, like first outside. I hated all of it. I was just telling a friend of mine, who was like, surely you had like math skills, you just didn't like it. I didn't. I had I took a year of geometry before I realized that the point of a proof is to prove something. Like I didn't know. I was like, why do we start with a thing, say all this stuff, and then say the same thing again? And in grad school, I was like, oh, because it's a proof. I didn't take a single math class in college. I am not a numbers and so that's part of why I feel so strongly about, doing my show and doing the speaking that I do, and trying to, because I think that the idea of a math person is a false idea. And I was lucky. I had a statistics teacher in grad school who said there are no bad people who are bad at math. There are just people with bad math teachers. And I think that's a lot of it. I think it's taught in a way that's very unapproachable, and it tends to be taught by people for whom it comes naturally. Like I want to learn math from people who also hated math. Then when I learn math to this day from people who speak math, no, you shut down and you feel dumb, and it's not right.
Totally. Okay, so I have a story that makes your point. So,
please.
I think I had math tutors every single year from 6th or 7th grade on, probably middle school, like on through high school, through college, and as a psych major, it was statistics, and then in my doctorate in psychology, I thought, I don't know how am I going to get through all of these research methods, statistics, advanced multivariate statistics. So of course I saved the last advanced multivariate statistics for my last semester before going off to internship. And I was dreading it. And the professor, he looked like, I never had him the other 4+ years. He looked like Snape, Professor Snape. The long dark hair was almost like music would follow him down. You go against the hallway.
Fog.
And I'm like, this is going to be the end of me. And he started the class with, I'm going to teach you statistics in a way that you've never been taught before. I'm going to tell you why we do it, what it is, and how it works. It was
I'm gonna weep.
All of a sudden, everything made sense to me. Of course, in my 20th year of school or whatever, finally I had it. So I had that experience. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, I'm so glad you shared that. And I'm so glad you had that experience, because it really takes, I used to tell my students, like I was trying at NYU, I taught a course called Data Science for Everyone. And by everyone, I mostly meant people who think data science is not for them. And unfortunately, what I ended up getting was people who already want to do data science, which is great and they're wonderful. But like, I really wanted to talk to the students who thought this is not a world for me. And I would try to get them. And then those who were there would understandably, find themselves getting frustrated, whether you're coding or whether it's statistics or what have you. And I would always try to tell them my rule of thumb, which is basically what you just described, which is I think it takes at least 3 exposures to the exact same material for it to start to click. Like you can take a statistics class in college and be like, I don't know. And then a statistics class in like your MBA program and be like, kind of, you maybe got to get your way through the exam, but you don't like really know why you're doing it. And then whether you take a 3rd class as an adult or happen to have a really good teacher or whatever, like for me, it wasn't until I taught it that I was like, I see. And even then, it can go away and it's very tricky, but it's having a really good teacher and just literally sitting with it a bunch of times in a row. And unfortunately for the world, which is increasingly run on data and statistics, most people don't have that luxury. I mean, even a high school curriculum often doesn't even include statistics. in a lot of places. Mine certainly didn't.
Well, now I've just gotten a little bit more behind the scenes of what I know is something that you are talking about all the time. And one of your missions is to sort of demystify what data does, how to read data, how to use data. So, I mean, you really want to turn it all upside down and get the people who think they can't understand it. No, you actually can understand it. And I think the people who you also take on in a nice, loving way of the people who think that the world data tells us everything.
Yeah.
You're like, no,
Not
it
so
actually, no, doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah. No, there's two types of, and I have lived in both of these camps depending on the field, but there's two types of students. And this is at least in my data science courses, but I've also talked about it with so I do contortion training, and I've talked about it with my contortion coach, where he says that there's two students who are really, really hard to teach. One is the student who thinks they cannot do things they can do. So you're afraid to do the back bend or the headstand, but you actually are totally capable of it. And I'm here to support you, blah, blah. So that's my students who are like, you put a mean up and they kind of freak out because they remember feeling dumb in math class. And you're like, no, you can do it. And then there's the students who think that they can do more than they can, which is the people who launch themselves into a handstand and then they fall over and they injure their classmate. And it's the people in my class who can write code better than I can and, write a program that could, run circles in my programs, but they don't know when to use it or the limitations of it or what the data is actually in that they're predicting and whether that actually maps to the reality that they're trying to understand. And that to me is actually even harder to teach, is you're really good at this, but you have some serious gaps in your knowledge and you have to have a level of humility to be like, oh, okay, I have something to learn even from something that feels very basic. And I think we all struggle with that, whether I've gone into a class and been like, I already know this, I don't need to be here. That makes me a worse student than going in and being like, oh, I'm so intimidated. Both are not ideal, but
right.
Yeah.
You brought up contortionist, so I want to bring this in right now, which is what was the road to becoming an acrobat, a circus performer, a contortionist, and then also a comedian? Does that have any way overlap? Well, let me put it this way. I hear it does have overlap because I've heard you talk about there's precision in all of it. We can get to that later. But how did that happen?
Yeah, very. Those are deep cuts that you're pulling out. Well done to you. It definitely came out by accident. And one of the many reasons I was excited to talk with you, I was like, maybe Dr. Dan can make some sense of this for me. But it's really just been, and I think increasingly, I think this is true. As much as I don't think that there's such a thing as math people, I don't think that there are people who are only creatives or not creative or not. I'm artist or not an artist. I think we all contain multitudes. I think everyone has both. Mm-hmm. And so truly my path through science was basically one of that was mostly just accidental. I guess I'll apply for this program. Oh, there's more math than I thought. All right, I'll stay because I don't know what else I'll do. Oh, it's actually pretty cool. I'm going to keep going. And growing up, I was always quite physically active and then kind of was drawn to dance a little bit later than you're supposed to be. I was kind of in middle high school. Normally, if you want to be a ballerina, you start when you're 4. But I was really into dance and movement. I minored in dance in college. And then I got to grad school and I thought, all right, it's time to be serious and learn these statistics. But I just kept, I'm just going to go take a ballet class. Or I'm going to go do some yoga. I took figure skating for a while. And it's just, we all have to have our outlets. And it so happened that at the University of Michigan, which was near Detroit, there was a place called the Detroit Fly House Circus School that I found in the darkest days of my dissertation. I'm sure you know those days where you're alone and you're miserable and you feel stupid and you feel bad and you can't get anything done and you don't know what you're doing. And you have all the pressure in the world.
Check.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
And then I randomly found this place and I had never done circus. I didn't know what it was. And I show up at this warehouse and it was all these people swinging from stuff and climbing on things. And it was just, I was like, people are just allowed to do this. That's amazing. And so what started as a totally just curiosity-based, fun outlet once a week to just get a break from the crushing desperation of graduate school ended up being something that I found really, really fulfilling. And I've been very fortunate since that I've been living in places, sometimes by design and sometimes by trying to get away, but then finding it, living in places where I was able to either continue training or performing in different ways. And so it's always just, every time I try to quit, it finds me again. And the same has been true with comedy.
Pulls me back in.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the same has been true with comedy. Like I always wanted to do stand up. I was too afraid. So I did improv in the summers between grad school. And then I moved to China and they had a stand up scene. And so I tried it and da 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 da. And it really is for a long time, I've been like, I got to pick something. And I can't, I at least have stopped trying to pick because that was a waste of time.
Right. Right.
But it's not like, that
Right.
you make sacrifices. Like I'm not going to be as good at comedy as people who do it full time, and I'm not going to be as good at data science as people who do it full time. But I've come to admit I can't possibly do just one without going insane.
No. Well, I mean, that was the basis of your previous podcast,
That's
right?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
and also though, my experience with working with individuals like you over the years, I'm glad to hear you say this. This is it's multi-potentiality. And
Mm-hmm.
when people have multiple potential, what a lot of people don't think about is when you have to choose. So
Yeah.
some professions end up requiring it in certain jobs. It's like there is so much loss
Yeah.
that goes with having to give up these other parts of you, and you have found a way not to, which is awesome.
I mean, I'm very fortunate that, I was headed towards a life in academia, again, by accident, not by design. That is one of the most, if not the most flexible jobs you can have, at least in the United States, where, you have to show up for class, but we were working from home and online way before it was
Right.
done anywhere else. And so I think had I been trying to pursue a career as a partner at a law firm or something, it wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah.
I also made the very difficult decision to not go up for tenure because I was like, I know that I'm not putting into my career, like the research aspect of it. Like I was teaching and I was doing that. And then instead of doing research, I was hanging from a trapeze. And so I was like, I need to not delude myself. And so you raise a good point. And I often wonder what a world might look like where these kind of more, I would hope, for example, that if I were going to a doctor's office, that I was going to a doctor who in the evenings did something that they found rewarding in some other way, right? It's like these professions that demand full dedication are maybe the ones where I most would hope that they have some kind of outlet.
Right.
So it is a shame that many jobs,
they don't allow
such
that.
a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and when I watched your talk in Hungary, the brain bar,
Yeah.
I just have to give everyone the visual. Is like you brought it together. Like, first of all, all your talks, well, the talks that I've heard, you bring comedy into your talks because it makes it more fun and it makes it more approachable. And so I think that is brilliant. However, I had never seen someone go from a tuxedo giving a data science talk. Yeah. Okay. I just,
they're all, we're an inclusive world.
We are very inclusive.
Data
Okay.
science.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
tomato.
Today data science world, 2, being in your acrobat, what do we call that? And it's an outfit, but it's
costume, I guess.
Costume. Delivering the second half of your talk with your tassels.
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone's just like, okay. Like it's funny seeing the audience. And then finishing it with a fire dance. I mean, like a flame, not throwing, but it's actually a very beautiful fire dance.
Thank you. Yeah, fire fans.
Fire fans. Yeah. So you do bring them together when you can.
When I can. And it's you'll also note that video is, I was on their outdoor stage at that particular conference. Because it was like, I've had a few people, and I love to do it, but there's very few theaters that are like, set a bunch of stuff on fire on stage. We don't care. And I've had other conferences call and say, like, what if we set up an aerial rig? And I say, yeah, fine. Like, we can do it. And then they'll call back a few days later and say, we spoke to our insurance and we're not doing it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Fair.
So, places like Hungary and, in China, it was a little bit more lax to do what we wanted from a safety perspective as well. But I like to try to combine them. As you said, comedy helps anything go down. Any tough message, can almost always, not always, but almost always be improved by comedy. And you see that with the popularity of The Daily Show and John Oliver and all that stuff. But the circus is harder to combine. And I've struggled to figure out a way to do it organically. That particular talk, I was very excited because they specifically said, could you talk about how to be a data acrobat? And so I was like, all right. So in that particular, and the idea is, you like see the data, but you're also flexible about the conclusions.
Right. Yeah.
So it lent itself. Whereas a lot of times I'll give a talk about like, what is the nature of political polarization?
Right.
And it's not really appropriate to then strip down and prance around. But
yeah, the UN, that'd be interesting.
Less good.
Less good. Less good. Okay, so let's move into data science.
Yes.
And let's start with what data is and what it isn't.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question, and one that I think my answer upsets a lot of people. Whereas one, it's information, but it's not truth. So it's information about the world. Usually I say it's information that we chose to write down. So data doesn't just exist. We say, all right, we are humans and we're going to track the temperature and how many hours have passed and how tall people are. And it's like, we could totally measure something else. Our key metrics every day could be the humidity and our width or something, right? And in some circles it is, but we decide. And there's a plenty of other things that do point that none of us are really keeping track of. And so data is something that we've decided to write down and track about something that we've decided is worth writing down and tracking. And so the very existence of data about something is a reflection of how important we think that thing is. It also is a reflection of how easy that thing is to measure. Money is easier to measure than happiness. So we have more data on money than on happiness. But I also think that there are more incentives to track money than happiness. And so we've figured out ways to track it. So data is information about the world that reflects what we think is important and what we think is important about that thing, the temperature or the amount, the net worth or the GDP or the whatever. And all of that is to say it can be informative and it can help us better understand the world and it can help us figure out how to solve problems in the world. But it's also not capital T truth. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when I talk about data, people assume that the data is correct.
Right. The data
are correct.
It never lies.
That it never lies. There's the sentence that I hate most in the world, which is, what does the data say? Or the data speaks for itself. And even very respected scientists say that a lot. During COVID, there were a lot of public health officials who said, wow, the data speaks for itself. We should be wearing masks. And it's like, actually, I agree on the mask count, but the data doesn't speak for itself. We say things about the data. And again, I struggle with that message, especially these days as we talk about fake news and deep fakes and confirmation bias and all that stuff. But it's, there's a level of like, I don't get to throw away data because I don't like the conclusions. I think this is what's happening. And in the data, it looks like the trend is going the other way. I don't just get to say, well, it's just data. We've just written it down. It's biased. I don't get to do that. But I also don't get to say, hey, the data shows this and this and this. Therefore, I'm 100% correct. And this is the reality that we're in. And so it's this messy middle, which is where a lot of science exists, which makes it hard to talk about, where it's like data is information, but it's not perfect, but it could be informative. And we always need to say, are we really measuring what we think we're measuring? And could we do a better job of keeping track of this? Take, for example, you go to the doctor and they keep track of I was at the doctor today and they're like, let me take your blood pressure and your pulse and your temperature. Okay, you're fine. Bye. Right. And it's like, we take those measures because those are the measures that we take. And lots of times they're informative, but maybe there's something else we should be measuring and we're totally missing it. Right. And so data is not perfect, but it can be useful. That was a really long answer.
No, that's right on, because okay. When I think about, it's like, how do we use the data? How do we interpret the data?
Yeah.
And when I think about the field of psychology and particularly the field of intervention, like therapeutic intervention, and having empirically validated best practice studies, which has, become a thing for several decades now. And it's like, this is what the study shows. This is what the data shows for this group.
Yeah.
And then when you look at it, it's hard often to generalize it to the real world, because the people you see are often have many more variabilities and confounding variables and factors than they were able to put in the study to make an empirically based study to reach these conclusions.
Exactly. Yes. And every study pretty much has that issue, where it's like, even if you're doing it in the field, or it's a survey that's a random sample, or it's in a lab, or it's something else, or it's online, every single study necessarily, just like every single data set, necessarily has limitations. You can only test so many patients. They're probably going to only participate in the study if they already care about this particular thing or that particular thing, or the way that we asked the question might have led them to, there's always going to be something. And so every individual study could potentially be wrong or misleading. But really the way I try to think about it is it's like, it's one piece of the puzzle. We of course we would throw it out if it's just like the data has been fabricated or the methods were, whatever. But like supposing it's like rigorous science, it's just one piece of the puzzle. And you have to wait until you have enough pieces to be like, oh, we're putting together a puzzle of a castle or a field or whatever. But too often we see the single thing and say, oh, it's green. This must be a puzzle of a field. Oh, in this particular study, people who drank coffee had more anxiety. Therefore, coffee causes anxiety. It's like, maybe, but let's do 10,000 more studies in slightly different ways and then zoom out and say, okay, on average, 60% of the time, it looks like coffee doesn't cause anxiety. I say this because I like coffee and I have anxiety and I don't want to give it up. But
doesn't the coffee not helpful for the anxiety?
I'm sure it's bad, but I refuse to believe it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that data, you believe the data you are looking for.
Exactly.
Right. Yes.
And that's the other piece of this, which is like the minute I roll in and say, well, actually data is not true and it could be biased and there could be selection issues. And what you said, it's like this particular study could be missing this, that, and the other thing, feels like free license to just dismiss it if you don't like the results.
Right.
And that's not what's happening. It's like you have to kind of take it all into account and then set aside how you feel about the results and come to the conclusion. I was on a Adam Grant's podcast years ago, and I don't mean to like name drop, but just to say
I listened to it.
You did very good work, very thorough work. Well done. But he said something that I think is great, which is every scientific study you read, you should have to read the methods before finding out the results and evaluate based only on the methods if you think it's a good study. Because usually, I see a study that says actually caffeine causes anxiety, and I'm like, I disagree, therefore I'm going to read this study with an eye to what they did wrong. Whereas if it's a study that says caffeine causes you to live forever, I'll be like, it's obviously a perfect study. I'm not going to be critical of it. So we all are guilty of these things. Yeah.
Well, and going back to the dark days of the dissertation, as just one data point is I clearly wanted, at least some of my hypotheses to pan out. So I'm like in there doing an objective study, of course, managed by my chair and the whole committee. But like I want an outcome, even though that doesn't change the outcome. So I'm wondering what in the real world with data science and studies, what is out there with people who are like looking for results versus objectively studying, seeing what it gives us, and then tweaking from there and adding to the literature and adding to the knowledge. And, which I think is more where you're arguing for, which is let's see what we find and then let's see what it tells us and then see what we have to do next.
Right. I mean, it's a serious problem at every level of the research, whether it's me sitting at home trying to find out for my own personal reasons whether all this coffee is causing my anxiety, or it's me in a lab being a actual nutrition scientist trying to understand the role of caffeine. It's the same issue where it's like we all have some preconceived idea about what a good outcome is. And in my dissertation work as well, I specifically remember sitting at the computer and at some point, you do multiple like statistical analyses and you present the suite of results and you test it. But the first time I was like clicking, run on the program that was going to tell me whether my hypothesis was even remotely on the right track or whether there was just a null nothing, I was nervous. You're just this better fucking work.
Exactly.
And then I don't know if I can swear. Sorry about that.
You can.
And then if it doesn't work, and I'm sure you experience this as well, you say, well, there's probably something wrong with the way I've laid this out. And you change the variables around and you're like, actually, I think the model is this. And it didn't do it until you have a result. And that's a problem in human psychology and in our need to, be right and all of that stuff. But it's also a problem in the industry because also, as you know, the popularity of publishing null results has increased, but not by much. And so if you want to have a job and a dissertation that gets you interviews and then a subsequent presentation about those results that gets you a tenure track job, you need results that are interesting. And the result of actually I was wrong is just not going to get you a job in a lot of circles. And so the challenge is that we spend a lot of time talking about, confirmation bias and motivated reasoning when we kind of criticize the I do my own research sort of tendency in the regular world, but scientists have institutional incentives to keep doing research until you get to something interesting. And two problems with that. One, the one you publish that's interesting might be a spurious, weird thing, but you were just like, okay, good. And two, non-results are really valuable, and we're not getting those. And so I think, I say this with some hesitation because I still think that science and scientists are the best thing we have. But even then, it's not like peer review is perfect. It's rightly come under a lot of criticism. And I struggle with how to talk about even science can be flawed. And in fact, a strength of science is we can talk about its flaws. It's difficult to balance talking about that without sounding like I'm anti-science. Does that make sense?
Totally
I don't have
sense.
A good answer, but it's
totally makes sense.
We have to both, it's like the file drawer problem. It's like if every now and again, p-value is 0.05. So that means that if I ran my study thousands and thousands of times, 5% of them would I'm going to get answers that are wrong sometimes. And I'm going to only publish the ones that are in the direction that I want. And so it's from the start, it's very difficult to even do science scientifically, truly, because of how incentives are. I still think it's better than anything else we have.
Right. So how do we use data?
Yeah.
Because also on, I think it was the Hungry Talk that you were talking about, it's hard to measure people. It's there's so many, it doesn't mean you can't do it, but if you're going to measure people, we got to think about all of the different variables that we need to measure to come up with actually helpful, actionable results. So how should we all be thinking about data?
Right. So it's there's a few steps to what I tend to tell people that, apart from learning statistics, which as we've discussed is arduous and miserable, but very helpful. But apart from that is anytime someone puts data in front of you, whether you're trying to read an academic journal or whether you're reading a news report that has a chart in it, or whether you're just seeing some crap on social media that says actually this goes up with that, correlate, blah, 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 is look for the data itself. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to download it. You can, and you should, and I recommend that if it seems like it's from a safe source. But generally speaking, if, say, a news outlet is writing some article that says, studies are finding that coffee is causing da-da-da, the first thing I would do is say, oh, okay, what was the study? The journalistic or the Instagram summary of it, I believe they're working through journalistic integrity for the most part, but the study is way more boring than the headlines are ever going to make them sound. And so go to the actual study itself. The data should be publicly available, or if it's not, the researcher should have it housed somewhere just to know that it's real data and they're not just making things up. Step 2, where did this data come from and how did they collect it? And most importantly, how did they measure it? I think measurement is a skill in data science that is widely overlooked. When we talk about data science, we talk about statistics and programming and machine learning and AI and all that stuff is very important, but measurement is how we turn the world into data in the first place. And so anytime you're looking at data, I'm looking at a study that says actually coffee causes anxiety. Number one, or coffee consumption causes anxiety. Number one, how are they defining coffee consumption? Is it any coffee? Is it more than 12 cups a day? Is it espresso only? I mean, that's sillier, but it matters, right? It's aspartame causes cancer. Yeah, but you have to have a bucket of it before that sort of thing. So, okay, what do they mean by coffee consumption? And 2, my goodness, what do they mean by anxiety? And you're the psychologist, so you can tell me the DCM-10 or whatever the way that we're measuring it. But a lot of times, anxiety is measured in terms of an increased heart rate or, self-reported anxiety an hour later versus some kind of longitudinal year-long study or whatever. Right. And again, that doesn't mean you throw the study away, but a thing that you clicked on Twitter or X that said coffee causes anxiety, look at the data. Is the data there? Number 2, how did they measure these things? Oh, drinking more than 6 cups per day is associated with an increased heart rate among study participants. That still could mean coffee causes anxiety, but that's not the same conclusion that you would draw from the initial headline.
Exactly.
So how is it measured?
Exactly.
And then the third goes back to the beginning, which is, are the conclusions that the writer is claiming to draw from the data warranted? And usually that's the gap between unemployment hits an all-time high and it's 0.000001% higher than it was last time. It's like, it is an all-time high, but it's also barely anything in the scheme of where it's been. And I was just reading a study that someone published about a poll they did in Florida where they asked participants if someone was speaking, saying racist things out on the street, would you intervene? And then they varied whether the person was black or white or Latino or whatever. And then they had these conclusions and the conclusions they drew were obviously everyone is biased. And you're just like, I don't know. I think what you studied was interesting and plausibly could point to bias, but the claim bias is a very loaded claim when really what you said is in this hypothetical scenario, people would feel more or less comfortable intervening if someone were doing something. And that does seem to have something to do with race, but I wouldn't leap to the sorts of like everyone is racist and biased sort of conclusion, even if I agree with her overall conclusion, which as a human politically
Right.
I did. But I think the study was very flawed because it was very specifically asking a very, very, as you said, very, very specific type of question, but the claim was bias. And you're like, that's not exactly fair.
So we had a recent episode on pop culture, which got me thinking about like every decade, every generation is a pop culture for that generation, right? It informs like whatever time you're living in informs how we think, how we dress, what we listen to, what we eat, all of this stuff. So where I'm going with this is we have a culture of sensationalism, news flashes, like this kind of shock stuff. I'm wondering, and I'm sure this is an empirical exploration, if we go back 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, look at headlines, look at the titles of studies, look at conclusions, look how the news captures them. I wonder if we have a change in how it is all reported.
Yes. I would imagine, and this is a good data science question, I don't know the answer, but I would imagine that you're correct, that we could tag the language for things that are sort of like emotionally charged words or words that elicit some kind of emotion. And that's actually, you don't even need LLMs for that. You can do that with regular old text analysis. And I would imagine that you're correct, that we are seeing more kind of emotion-based headlines. What I can tell you is some research that's been done on understanding the virality of different tweets or posts on social media. And 1,000%, the posts that elicit anger and fear, emotions full stop, spread further than non-emotional posts, and particularly anger and fear are much more likely to be spread. So if you want to go viral, you can, say neutral, normal things, or you can act outraged, and the latter is gonna take off.
Definitely.
Yeah.
When I was also listening you describe how we should be looking at data, I had a flash of like it's the graduate level version, and I don't mean that in graduate school, of what I remember us teaching our kids when watching commercials. Like we were teaching them who made this commercial.
Yeah.
What are they actually selling? Who are they selling it to? And what are they wanting you to think because of what outcome they want? And so then, getting our kids to be critical about that sugar cereal or whatever it was. And so this is, to me, the modern version at a higher level of like, because there's data. Everything is data now. Everything is data. And this is, and one of your goals is to get everyone to be able, you actually say this is part of being a global citizen.
I do say that.
Right? is how, is for everyone to become their version of a data scientist.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as a kind of literacy, just like you want to learn to read or, maybe program, though that's rapidly changing. At this point, it's being a prompt engineer for Copilot or something like that instead. But I do think it's a kind of literacy. And this goes back to where we started the conversation, where I feel one of the reasons I think it's so important is that I would never have entered this world had I not stumbled into this program that happened to be very quantitative. And I literally just didn't read the program description. I don't know I don't know how I got in. I had no idea what I was signing up for. I didn't know. And so I was force fed this stuff. And I feel very grateful now that, and I'm not perfect at it at all. And there's a ton of statistics and stuff that is way beyond me, but I have a fighting chance when someone posts like a bar chart and makes a claim of being like, I don't think that's a fair conclusion to draw from that at all. And I can say, here's the 3 things we just talked about and a handful of other reasons why I'm skeptical. But most people don't have that, and I wouldn't if I hadn't randomly ended up in this kind of like sliding doors alternate universe. And so I feel like a great responsibility. I mean, it's a kind of a fancy way of putting it, but like I feel so grateful that I happened to learn this stuff, that it concerns me that it's not, available. And maybe that'll change, but not soon enough for the rest of us,
How many people in your field see it like you? Like where do you fall
Mm.
in the data science? I don't know if that, you know what I'm
Yeah.
being like, that's a very loose question, but like
No,
you understand where I'm coming from?
I think so. I'll answer it. You tell me if this is a question that you asked. I think that, and it's an empirical question that I don't truly know the answer to, but I think that, and it may be rapidly changing. We might be about to see a lot more science activism. We already are, in fact. But generally speaking, the appetite in much of academia is, and it's certainly in data science and to an extent political science, but I can speak more recently to data science, is to be not interested in talking to people outside of the field. And a kind of, and this will sound disparaging and I am biased, but a kind of hubris of, we are the experts, we will tell the people what to do and they will do it. And I think the first big crack in that was COVID, where there was just a ton of skepticism and a ton of backlash and a ton of messaging that I think was not handled particularly well. Easy for me to sit here and say around, are we masking? Are we not? Are they safe? Are they not? And so on. But I think generally speaking, I mean, even one of the reasons I left my job at NYU was I went to the director of the program, who's very great and wonderful. And I said, hey, I would love to offer my course specifically to people in the art programs at NYU. Like I want to teach specifically, because as I said, most of the students who signed up for my course were in computer science or statistics anyway. And I was like, that's great. And I think that they should also learn these things. But I was like, I really would love to reach education and theater majors and because I think it's important. And she said, and I don't say this to be mean, she was like, Andrea, she was like, I'm sorry. Why should I care about the artists? And I was just like, what? Oh no. I was like, they need to know how to do this. She was like, if you want to teach the artists, that's your business, but like, we can't offer that class. And I was like, okay. So I would say I'm on the outskirts of thinking that it's like incredibly important that people know how to do this stuff, and know how to read scientific papers. There's absolutely a big contingency. Most people, I think, are in the middle and are just like, I just want to do my work and I love the research and I'm going to just do it. And if I have to talk about it or get to talk about it, that's great, but it's not going to be something that I'm going to go out of my way to do. I think that's where most people land. But there's a group on the right, and I'm saying right, but that's not really meaningful in this context. But there's a group that's like, we shouldn't teach people how to do statistics, machine learning, if they're not going to learn it all. Like if you're not going to get a PhD, we should not teach them anything because then they're going to misuse it. And that's like, to me, like abstinence only education. It's like, let's just assume we're all going to misuse it, right? Like let's learn how to do this thoughtfully. And so that's a shrinking side, but I have encountered that side a lot over the years.
Well, I mean, you have a really interesting perspective because you are an ambassador, so to speak, for data science, and you're a skeptic, but all in favor of the science, of like really understanding and using the science.
And it's so hard to do that because I sound like I hate all the sides, and that's really not the case. It's like, I think science's greatest strength is our willingness to be wrong and to talk in scientific circles. Like, and I'm sure you know this as well, like in academic conferences and in, roundtable where you go through and kind of give feedback on each other's research, there's a ton of like, you give a talk about what you're working on. There's a ton of like, this is the limitation of this study. We have no idea about this. What you were saying before, everything outside of the study we can't account for. We have no idea if it was a random. We're very, very good at being very humble and self-deprecating almost to a fault. But then somehow the translation of that to the outside world is, we are scientists, we are right, you must listen to us. And that is not an accurate reflection of what science is.
Right.
And B, I think has contributed to the rise of anti-science or anti-vax or climate skepticism or whatever, because the science is imperfect. There are negative consequences to vaccines, but we don't allow people to talk about it, so they assume we're hiding something, when in fact, if from the beginning we'd said, hey, this is overwhelmingly safe, of course there are going to be side effects, and of course it's new, we don't know for sure, but let's have a conversation. I don't have data to support this, but I think we could have gotten a lot further than if we just said vaccines are safe, and if you talk about it, we are going to dismiss you.
So this is one of the ways for using data to make the world better. I mean,
it's one of the ways.
It's what, like, so let's talk about like the ways as you see them. Is how do we use this stuff for good?
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing is also with humility.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. And that's the problem with a lot of this is that we're not in a world right now, I don't think. And I'm sounding more confident than I want to. On a daily basis, I'm just like, I might be all wrong about all of this, but maybe that's the humility speaking. But I think I don't know the answer, but it's like, we're in a world that does not currently reward uncertainty or humility. We're in a world that rewards everything's going to be great. America's going to be great. Like, a natural diet boosts your immune system, and whatever, right? Whatever the thing is. And so trying to win a battle of like, it's like if you're in like a debate club and one side is making all the points and the other side is like, you raise some interesting points. There's a lot of flaws with my argument. I still think that I'm probably right, but like, I'm going to be nuanced and thoughtful about this. Like, that side will lose the debate every time. And I don't have a good answer other than doing more of what I know how to do, which is talk about why numbers are not perfect, but they're still very informative and we don't get to throw away ones we don't like. Like, that's sort of my best effort at kind of doing this, but it would be a lot easier if I just rolled out and said, all science is great, everyone shut up,
Right. It's making me think of, and I can't think of the podcast. He's a writer. He's written some great stuff. I think he wrote Moneyball.
Michael Lewis.
Yeah, Michael Lewis.
Yeah,
his podcast. And there was one series that was why you don't want an expert to be an expert witness. And basically, because real experts have uncertainty.
Yeah.
That's exactly your point.
Yes.
But the experts that are commissioned are the ones to say with absolute certainty this.
Yeah.
And that's misses a lot.
I mean, I have seen people, this is, 1,000 years ago and lightly exaggerated, but I have seen people not get jobs because they came in and delivered for academic jobs, you give a job talk. So you give like a 30-minute presentation on your latest research, and then everyone peppers you with questions and talks about why it's bad and what you did wrong. And they're really kind of grueling sometimes. But like, that's the spirit of science, is you just tear people down, but like try to do it thoughtfully. And this person, I wasn't on the hiring committee. I don't know if this is why, but this person kept like defending their work in a way. They were like, this is the biggest conclusion in international relations in 20 years. And this is like rock solid research. And like, they got very defensive and very confident. And that would have played incredibly well on TikTok or the nightly news or a clip.
Yeah.
But it, to the credit of the rest of the room, landed horribly. And I saw faculty leaving and being like, this guy thinks that he's like the next great thing. No way. Like, you have to be humble to really make progress. And so, but that guy is probably a newscaster. Now, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know who he was. Like, I don't remember any of that. But it's, and the other challenge with all of this is that I increasingly suspect that it's hard for me to talk about this without sounding like I myself am anti-science. But it's like, I'm complimenting science for being so nuanced and humble and uncertain and wrong and making mistakes and then course correcting and da-da-da-da-da-da. But it's like, it reads like, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people who are vaccine skeptics and climate skeptics, they think they're out-sciencing science. Like, a lot of the conversations I've seen, I'm not part of them, but a lot of the conversations I've seen are like, oh, because science is wrong, they're misleading us, and therefore I'm not going to believe that these vaccines are safe, and I'm going to outsmart. I'm like, it's like critical. They think they're being extra critical thinkers. So there's like this line in the middle where I guess the humility comes in again. That's like, okay, I am worried about the safety of these vaccines. I'm going to do all the research that I possibly can get my hand, or read all the research I can get my hands on. And also, I need to know that I have a motivated agenda as I'm approaching this, and I need to be mindful of that. And it's very hard. I'm not surprised we're in this world that we're in.
This is all making me think about how, when you talk about uncertainty, and we're in a world like we want certainty, and like certainty sells and gets published, and uncertainty doesn't. And yet we're at this point in time where we are needing to step into uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
We're needing to ask more questions. We're needing to understand other points of views. Like we're really
Mm-hmm.
needing to dig into asking the tough questions.
Mm-hmm.
And as you point out, like there's this pull to not do that. But
Right.
it's like I'm hearing, like, how do we lead with science? Do this in science. Lead, because
I
so
know.
much is about science these days of what we're all, the information that we're giving. Is it scientific reform? Or is it
Mm.
more subtle? Like, is this big or subtle, or like
Mm.
how would you frame it?
It's a really good point that you're bringing up, which is, whatever side, and I'm sort of thinking of a binary, but there are many, many different sets of perspectives you could have on any issue or any topic or any set of priorities that the US or the world or whatever it might have. But it is a kind of like you either agree with your camp or you don't. And you see this in the conversations on the left after the November election of last year, where it was like, did we go too far to the center? Should we have leaned more to the left? And it's sort of fracturing into people who think, oh, we should like reach out to the center, and we should go to the left. And it's like, if you question the camp that you're in, like, hey, I'm way on the left, but maybe we should try to talk to you're like kicked out.
Right.
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 And then on the right, and again, I'm wildly oversimplifying, but on the right, there's a similar sort of thing where it's like, at least in my experience, there's a fair amount of like bad faith questions where it's like, hey, I'm just asking questions here. Like, I'm just saying, like, what if the vaccines were killing everyone? And it's like, it's not a useful question, but we should allow, maybe we shouldn't all agree on climate change, or maybe we shouldn't. You can't ask, even saying these hypothetical questions that I don't actually have, feel charged to say.
Right.
And there's just like, it's very unfortunate that we've come into a world where I think any political persuasion, anyone who questions what the kind of loudest prevailing voice is shunned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then if you say, hey, we should question the loudest prevailing voice, you instantly sound like a tinfoil hat person, right?
Right.
Like it's sort of a lose-lose. And I don't know, to your kind of broader question, like, is this a massive change or is it a subtle thing? I think the answer is kind of a cop-out answer, is like, maybe it's both. I think one thing that's unique these days is that, at least when I was in grad school, research, no one cared about research if you weren't doing research. Like, you didn't hear I did my own research. There was very little, like, the communities that were like, actually, we don't vaccinate our kids, were like pretty small. And if they were vocal, it was only to each other. And so the internet has allowed more fringe voices to become louder. But also, the internet has meant you don't have to physically go to a library to look at research. You can just look up and find studies. And so I think the necessity of scientific literacy has skyrocketed. And I think COVID, again, like, in my mind, put that front and center, because it all was so urgent and it was so fast and there was so much uncertainty, and it affected so many people so immediately in a way that even like climate change or like the flu every year is not this like mega event that causes people to really like change how they interact with, public health. It's kind of like the public health / scientific literacy version of 9/11, where all of a sudden it was like, oh, no one's going through airports ever again without a ton of security. Like, I really think it was a big moment.
One of the main things that I'm taking from this that I hadn't thought about in this way before is the importance of data and science literacy, as you're pointing it out. Because when we look at just as math and science, and I'm a math person, I'm not a math person, I'm a science person, I'm not a science person, it's so academic.
Mm-hmm.
And then for people who are good at it, it's easy, even if it's boring. It's easy.
Right.
The people who are bad at it, it's terrible. But that's it's like a vacuumed version of what these skills really are in the world that we are now in, where everyone has, where there are big headlines, and most everyone has access to information.
Yeah.
This is about having it, as you say, informed global citizens. Is a skill to really look at the conclusions with our own critical eye, as opposed to just believing a headline or believing a conclusion.
Right. And, for a long time, in political science, the language was like, you get information rather than having to do all the research on a particular policy yourself. You get information shortcuts from political elites. So I decide that I'm going to listen to Clinton rather than Bush, and then whatever he says is the right policy, I'm going to say is the right policy, and that's like kind of you vote on party lines, and it's all, and there is that, but it's also the case. At what you're saying is making me think of, there's like Joe Rogan or Oprah or random mom influencer in the vaccine world, and so the elites are just, anyone can be an elite. An influencer can be an elite, whether or not they have scientific, not that Clinton or Bush had particular scientific training, but it's the sort of, what we all took to be, the democratization of information and communication has led to a lot of great things, but it also means that it's that much easier for some random person to totally persuade a ton of people. And I was talking to someone on my podcast who was like, there's not really a left and a right politically. There's more like, and this is an estimate, but there's more like 13 fractured communities of people who all kind of agree with each other and never go outside of those communities. And all of them think that they're pointing to data that supports their view. And it's like, there has to be a fuller picture, but we're not really trained to make sense of all of this.
No, and I'm hearing you saying, as we wind down, and I want to hear like your closing thoughts or points on stuff that we've talked about, just as like how do we use data to better our world. One thing I'm hearing is to be skeptical, but not, it's like inquisitive, not skeptical like I'm just going to be a skeptic of everything I hear just to be a skeptic. It's more like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let me look at this. So how would you phrase like maybe 3 things for people to take away of how to use data for good?
Yeah. I mean, the first one I think you're hitting on, and I don't have a word for it, but it's a kind of like, be skeptical but not cynical. Maybe?
Oh, that's it. Okay, that's, yeah.
Or like, thoughtful skepticism or something like that, which is to say, and I do a lot of work with the skeptic community, consider myself a skeptic myself, and I have to be skeptical of the limitations of my own knowledge and bias as well. Like, I have to both be skeptical of anything that doesn't have a lot of evidence to support it, and also be aware that I am working under my own motivated reasoning. And just because it's the mainstream message doesn't mean I necessarily reject it. Like, I don't want to be a curmudgeon either. And so there's a kind of like, I mean, healthy skepticism is a widely used term, but there's a kind of like, there's a risk with calling yourself a skeptic and saying that you're skeptical, of assuming that that also means that you are logical and infallible. And it doesn't necessarily mean you think those things, but you sort of like, because I consider myself to be a skeptical person, I'm unwilling to be open to the idea that I may also have motivated reasoning when I approach things. It's like anyone who calls themselves rational makes me nervous, right? It's like none of us are rational. We're ruled by emotions and mental shortcuts and circumstance, and in ways that we don't understand, in many ways that we do understand. And you're just not rational. There's no one is, right?
I'm hearing like curiosity would be in here somewhere, like to be like curious as opposed to.
Yeah. I mean, I was so glad you said the humility piece before, because another thing that I say a lot when I give talks on this is like, the way to work with data in a way that actually helps us better understand the world and then draw conclusions that hopefully lead us to do things to improve it, is to be both humble but not afraid. And you have to do both. Like, you have to be humble to say, like, every data set is imperfect. The fact that we have data on this is a reflection of a broader bias. The conclusions I'm drawing could be wrong. I could be looking for something because I think it's there and I want it to be there for whatever reason. But I also can't be so afraid of being wrong, of getting to a conclusion that's against what other people think, of finding out that I'm wrong, that I don't do anything and I just sort of sit in my fear. So you kind of have to approach any data set or any study that involves data or says, here's a study. I have to both be humble and be like, I'm not, just because I call myself a hyper skeptic doesn't mean I'm like reading this like a robot. Like, I have to be humble that I might be interpreting this, looking for what I want, rejecting it because I just don't trust the author or whatever. But I also have to be brave enough to work with data and engage with data and be okay with being wrong and talking to people I disagree with. And then, I think the third piece is curiosity. I think curiosity and creativity. One of the biggest misconceptions about data, and this is kind of where we started the conversation, is that it's not a creative area to work in. And the best data science research, the best quantitative research I have ever found is the stuff that is absolutely far and away the most creative work. And the creativity comes from saying, gosh, here's something I care about. I have absolutely no idea how we could turn that into data. What if we did this, and this interesting, fascinating thing, and then actually generated a study based on, I'm being very abstract. I can give you an example if you want, but creativity is how we figure out new ways to get data. It's how we figure out new ways to look at the same data and make new discoveries. So a cool one is in political polarization. For a long time, scientists kept finding that we're not ideologically that far apart. Most people on the left and most people on the right are actually pretty moderate. And you can argue whether that's good or bad, but most people want sensible gun control. Most people are fine with gay marriage. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we have in common, but you don't hear about that stuff. And so the data they kept looking and looking and looking, and there was no data to support all these claims of polarization. You're just like, it's not there. Like, why are we so wound up? And then it turned out that actually it wasn't about policy. It was about disliking each other. And so when you turn, it's called affective polarization. And so it's emotion-based polarization. So ideologically, a lot of us agree, but we absolutely emotionally despise the other side. And that takes an incredible amount of creativity, awareness, reflection, knowledge of politics and your own political community to say, hang on, we keep asking about policy. What if we just ask people what they think about the other side as opposed to what they think about climate? That's not statistics. That's not programming. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And a thoughtful reflection of like, this is what we're screaming about, is because we hate each other.
And to try to understand, to try to understand it, though, so we can do something about it.
And begin from a place of like, the curiosity that you said is spot on. It begin from a place of like, I wonder if I'm right. I wonder what's going on. I wonder what might help, as opposed to, I know this is true, and therefore I will be an activist about this thing. There's room for activism, and I think I support a lot of activism. I do a lot of activism, but at the core, I think that if more of us approach things with like, gosh, it really feels like things are horrible. Here's an area I care about. Is there some way we could like turn over some stones in a new way and make sense of this? Another example that I think is really great is from a scholar named Pat Egan, who studies climate. And it turns out if you want pro-climate policies, phrasing, hey, we should do something for climate change in the red states does very little. But saying, hey, what if we built a really robust renewable energy industry that would create a ton of jobs for everybody, goes a long way. So it's like, the data is the same, but you're rephrasing it in a clever way. Then you can really get to some solutions.
Interesting. Well, all of this at the end reminded me of what I wrote down about something that you said, which I think takes this whole show home, which is, I believe that curiosity, imagination, and creativity are the engines of the future.
There we go.
There it is.
I forgot I said that. I stand by it. Yeah.
Oh, good stuff. Well, I feel like we could go deep. We could keep going. There's so much to talk about. The other one of your strengths, part of your mission, is to educate people in all levels of understanding of data, of math, of science, as you said, so you can bring everyone along. And I just think that is so important. And I know that I'm going to be thinking about data science, math, statistics differently, conceptually different, because of the meaning that it has and the way we are evolving as a culture. To really trust data, but we need to be very smart and discerning about how we use it.
I appreciate you saying that and giving me a chance to talk about it. But this was always a delight to talk about the joys and perils of data.
The joys and perils. That's another episode title. The joys and perils of data. Tell Andrea, tell everyone about, you have lots of stuff on your website. Tell everyone everything they need to know.
Yeah, so you can, if you want to learn more about data and curiosity, Jones-Rooy, JONESROOY.com, and then at Jones-Rooy on all the social medias. And I have a podcast called Behind the Data Show, or it's Behind the Data. It's at behindthedatashow.com. And it's, I talk to people who are, experts on a particular data set, and we dive into a lot of doing what we just talked about, which is like, well, how do you measure this sort of thing? And how do you know that you're actually studying what you think you're studying? And what are some conclusions that might surprise people? Another recent one was we talk about misinformation more than there actually is misinformation if you actually go out and count how many articles are wrong. But that doesn't mean it's not a problem. It just means that So what are some things that you can learn from the art and science of quantification?
Well, you are creating a new generation of data scientists.
Well, I hope so. Thank you.
Yes. I so enjoyed my conversation with Andrea, who has opened my eyes and mind to so many things. Here are 5 key takeaways from our conversation. 1, data isn't truth. It's information we've chosen to record, and understanding how we measure things is as important as what we measure. Number 2, scientific literacy is essential for modern citizenship. We're surrounded by data-driven headlines, and we need the tools to discern what's meaningful. Number 3, be skeptical but not cynical. Approach data with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to admit your own bias. Number 4, measurement is inherently creative. The most transformative data work comes from asking better, more human questions, not just crunching numbers. And number 5, the best scientists and global citizens lead with imagination, curiosity, and the courage to be uncertain. Thank you for listening to this show. Please share it with everyone you think will benefit. Thank you for subscribing and being a part of our amazing community. You are appreciated. And remember, we have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Uplifting Folk by Awesome Music. Artwork by Kelly Dwyer. Follow us on social media at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, visit drdanpeters.com.